I'm overwhelmed, swamped and submerged beneath the heavy burden of my guilt. It clings to me and won't let go. Matthew 14, Peter's walking on the water, another familiar passage, and Jesus is calling in him. He's actually walking on the water as he keeps his eyes on Jesus, and as soon as he takes his eyes off Jesus and onto the storm, you imagine like walking on a flat sea would be scary enough, never mind a storm, like if you think about the waves crashing over you and he's walking on it, but as soon as he took his eyes off Jesus and onto the storm, he cried out. He was terrified. He saw the strength of the wind and he cried out for help. Nehemiah 4, it talks about Nehemiah and the children of Israel who were rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And it said they faced extreme opposition. And they were fearful. The builders of the wall were fearful. Nehemiah responded to them, "Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome and fights for your families, your sons and daughters, your wives and homes." So many more that we could talk about if you just read. People of God who faced difficult situations were overwhelmed. If you read on beyond those stories, a lot of them, most of them, became overcomers in those situations. That word, overwhelm, next slide please, thank you, means to be submerged under the weight of something. So something pressing down on you, to cover over completely as if a great wave, to bury beneath, to crush down or to oppress, and to be enveloped as to become weak or faint. So no strength. Anyone felt like that? Felt like the situation's just beyond them and just like, this is just pressing down on me. Being overwhelmed emotionally is much more than just little stresses that happen in our life. But if we don't deal with the little stresses properly, they can build up and turn into overwhelm. So overwhelm is actually a series of lots of stresses that you haven't managed, and it becomes overwhelm. So it can be the pressures, it can be little irritations, it can be offences. There's a passage, isn't there, about deal with the little foxes. Deal with the little things before it becomes overwhelm. Often many stressors contribute towards emotional overwhelm, but sometimes a significant event like a traumatic accident or losing a loved one or whatever can lead to that. And living overwhelmed can take its toll on our mental and physical health. It can lead to conditions such as depression and anxiety, addiction, a whole range of physical symptoms. And sometimes we don't even realize we're suffering from overwhelm because we've become so accustomed to living like that. If we've got a pattern of that in our life. So overreacting to seemingly insignificant things like losing your car keys. Does that become like this massive, massive deal? It's like disproportionate response to something can be an indication of overwhelm. A physical illness or chronic tiredness, like that it's got no reason. You're just tired all the time. Or just feel like that could be an indication of overwhelm. Having difficulty focusing on or completing simple tasks that you normally could, or maybe withdrawing from friends and family for no particular reason. All could be. Not always. There could be other reasons. I love these verses in Psalm 61, on the next slide. And this is in the Passion Translation, but I'm going to give you in a different translation because I love what it says. And actually, I read this very recently, and I thought, do you know how you've read the Bible, and then you read it again and you think, that was never in the last time I read it. This is one of those verses. It's one of those ones I think the Lord wants to put his finger on. Well, he wanted to put his finger on for me. For no matter where I am, even when I'm far from home, I cry out to you for a father's help. When I'm feeble and overwhelmed by life, guide me into your glory where I am safe and sheltered. And then I think it's the NIV version on the next slide, it says, from the ends of the earth I call to you. I call as my heart grows faint or overwhelmed. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. For you've been my refuge, a strong tower against the foe or the enemy. You know, the Lord doesn't want us to be trapped in a cycle of overwhelm. He's reminding us that he's giving us a way out, a way of escape, a place of safety when situations get a little bit tricky. And encased in this short passage, 2 verses, is a way of moving from being overwhelmed to overcoming that I want to unpack now. What is it talking about? How to deal with our emotions in a healthy way. I read a book maybe just like a couple of weeks ago, actually, by Havilah Cunnington called I Do Feelings. Brilliant. It's a new book of hers, and it was really helpful. And I've got a few quotes from there because I found it so helpful. So we're going to look at 3 things that help us move from overwhelm to overcoming. So next slide, please, Sue. Thank you. So, firstly, we have to get it straight that all emotions are God-given and it's okay to feel. Did you hear me? All emotions are God-given and it's okay to feel. I know everyone's like, yeah, but actually sometimes we don't live like that. We were made in the image of God, even our emotions. Jesus experienced a full range of emotions. Somebody actually recorded that there were 39 different emotions that Jesus experienced. So John 11 talks about Jesus weeping at Lazarus' tomb, his friend. Do you remember? And it said when he wept, tears were streaming. This wasn't just a little sort of like dab my face. Tears were streaming down his face. He was overwhelmed by grief. Mark 11, it talks about Jesus when they're selling stuff in the temple. And it said he burned with righteous anger, another emotion. Luke 10:21, Jesus was full of joy or overflowing in joy. And Matthew 36, towards the end of his life, when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and it says he was overwhelmed by sorrow. We were made to feel. We're made in his image. You know, and often the church gives the impression that some feelings are okay, and some are not okay. Some are wrong, some are sinful. So we learn that we should control certain emotions and we should stuff them down because it's wrong. You shouldn't feel like that. Oh, it's wrong to feel like that. But you see, labeling emotions as bad leads to avoidance and suppression, which is unhealthy and can lead to overwhelm, like I said. The problem is that you can't selectively suppress emotions. So if you suppress anger, you're likely to numb passion. If you suppress grief, you're likely to numb gratitude. If you suppress fear, you will numb discernment. If you suppress sadness, you will numb joy. And I don't know whether sometimes, you can feel like, I'm struggling just to feel anything. I'm struggling to feel excited about anything, or just joyful about anything, passionate about anything. I feel flat. And that might be an indication that you've stuffed down a particular emotion that you thought was wrong and you've not dealt with it. Because when you do that, all your other emotions are linked and will be suppressed. And also, when you suppress emotions, they don't disappear. They'll always find their way to the surface. They'll leak out or even burst out, especially in a situation that presses the red button. Anyone been there? I had my red button pressed just a couple of days ago, and out popped an emotion. So emotions are not inherently good or bad in themselves. It's what we do with those emotions that are. So those are the ones that can be positive or negative. It says in Ephesians, it says, in your anger, do not sin. So in your anger means when you're angry, don't sin. So feeling angry is a natural human reaction. But allowing it to dictate sinful actions or let it fester into bitterness, that is when it's wrong. So feeling the feeling isn't wrong. It's what we do with that feeling that is wrong. Okay, so that's the first thing. We need to get it right. All emotions are God-given, even the ones you don't think are. Secondly, feelings. So next slide, thank you, Sue. Feelings then are signals. They're information. They may not always be accurate, but they're indicating something's going on. Havilah in her book said, emotions are signals to pay attention to, not whole stories to live by. So our body then signals an emotion, so fear, anger, whatever. We might feel suddenly afraid or really angry about something, and then our brain kicks in and tries to explain the story or predict what's going to happen, often with the wrong narrative. We can jump to the worst case scenario. We can think, I'm feeling it, therefore it's real. But it's not the case always. You know, if someone ignores me, I come into a room, somebody ignores me and I feel rejected. Even if that's not the truth and they were just really busy and distracted or whatever was going on, my brain then can tell me a story based on the last time I was rejected. My last experience in this will suddenly go, whoa, would you remember that? And say, we don't think about that, we just get the feeling of it, don't we? We're like, oh, and out it pops, that suppressed emotion. So we need to realize that our emotional response is just information so that we can then act on it. Our job isn't to silence these signals, it's to understand them and to bring them to God. This is so important. And I've never heard anyone speak on this, but it's really significant for actually living free. And so it's important to name an emotion. Another quote from the book says, when I refuse to name what I feel, I don't erase it, I just let it run wild underground. True. Proverbs 20, verse 5 says, the purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out, or to pull up from a deep well. The purposes of a person's heart are deep waters. There's lots going on in there. But the one who has insight draws them out, pulling up from a deep well. So naming an emotion is like putting your bucket in and bringing it up to the surface. So our goal then is to realize our feelings are signaling something, but they don't define everything. So what we do then is we pause. We feel the emotion, we pause. Okay. We discern what's going on here. I have just reacted. And then we pull the truth to the surface. We don't drown in assumptions. And this is where emotional maturity and freedom begins. Do you remember the story of Hannah in 1 Samuel? Hannah couldn't have children and was distraught about it. It says she was deeply distressed and prayed in bitterness of soul. Sometimes we'd think, oh, it's wrong to be angry and whatever. You just have to trust God. Just trust God. And we do that, don't we? Because we want to and we say, it sounds so spiritual, doesn't it? But actually, Hannah was pouring out her heart to the Lord. She expressed her anguish so openly that Eli, the high priest, thought she was drunk. Yet in her honesty, the way she named her pain drew the attention of heaven. Honesty opens the door for God to meet us. Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, like I mentioned earlier, and he said, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He was completely honest, and he named how he was feeling. He asked for help from his friends, and he took his burden to his Father and got a new perspective. And then he said, not my will, but yours. He moved from overwhelm to overcoming. So it's okay to feel. They're signals. Those feelings are signals that we need to do something with and not suppress. The last point, then. So, feelings are great messengers, but terrible masters. Emotions shouldn't lead us. We should lead them. 2 Corinthians 10, Verse 5 says, we demolish arguments and pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. That word, take captive, it says to take at spear point, to seize and to lead away. So we don't suppress our emotions, we escort them to Jesus. So we name the emotion, anger, fear, right fear, you're coming with me. I'm taking you to Jesus. This is really practical stuff. Psalm 61, like it said, my favourite verse of the week. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. David didn't pray for the flood to stop. He said, lead me higher. You know, God doesn't remove the water. He gives us a rock to stand on. And when we're feeling overwhelmed, we don't need to be stronger. We need to be led higher. When we're feeling overwhelmed, we don't need to be stronger. We need to be led higher. So we need to stop trying to control our emotions, but to bring them to the Lord. And David did this in the Psalms, didn't he? Over and over again. We had the psalm right at the beginning that Sylvia read out. One moment, and this is in many psalms, one moment he's crying out in distress, God, where are you? I am feeling overwhelmed. Generally, that was the gist of it. But then he's named them, hasn't he? He's brought them to the surface. He's not suppressed them, feeling guilty that he's feeling like that. He expresses that before the Lord. He brings them to God, allows him to heal him, and then it gives him a new perspective. And often he ends up worshipping, doesn't he? Where he started being overwhelmed, it leads him to worship. That is that process from moving from overwhelm to overcoming. So this, then, I'm just drawing this to a conclusion now. This is spiritual maturity. This is what it means to be an overcomer. Not feeling less, but being safe to feel. No longer being afraid of what we feel, but bringing our feelings to him and inviting him into the midst of them so that we can then receive peace. You know, that we can read lots of verses that, don't be afraid, God is with you. And, when I felt afraid, I'm like, no, I need to, believe this verse. And I'm like, and I don't feel any different. And I'm like, my head's got it, my heart's not got it. It's not until I've gone through this and realized this revelation of actually, I feel afraid. Okay, you're coming with me. I'm taking you to give you to the Lord. And then the Lord gives us a different perspective. He lifts us up in the midst of it. That's what's being real. A final quote from Havilah in the book. When faith leads and feelings follow, peace stops being a fleeting moment. It becomes our home base. Wholeness is when faith and feelings finally stop fighting. When faith and feelings finally stop fighting. This is a song that I read recently, but I'm going to read it you like a poem. But it's talking about this process of moving from overwhelmed to overcomer. And then I'll pass it back on to Keith. In this dark place of fear, I look for refuge. In this tumult and this storm, I look for rest. I seek the shadow of your wings, for Lord, the peace you give is best. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me higher to the rock where I know I can stand. You're my strength and my salvation, my strong tower, and I'm held in the palm of your hand. I'll sing your praise. I'll sing praise unto your name, and your goodness I'll proclaim, even when the waves of fear are all around. When I'm overwhelmed, I'll run to you. I'll not yield to the stronghold of worry. I will cling to the promises you've made. For you are almighty, and you change not. And these trials in my life reveal your grace.
you, Janet. Wonderful. I just feel we need to pause a bit to process that. So we've got a few minutes now while I just get ready for communion for you to think about what Janet's been saying.